Jaya Gopijana Balaba Girivardhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Jayam Vishnupad, Paramahansa, Paribhadakacharya, Astatara Satashi Shiman, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti, Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Shikaho, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita, Shri Gadadhar, Srivas Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Shri Radha Govinda, Gopi Gopinath, Shamakund, Radhakund, Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Mathura Dham Ki Jai, Navadweep Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Swami Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Srimati Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai, Go Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Before beginning, I'd like to beg for the blessings of all the devotees, especially Maharaj. I feel a little awkward speaking here before you, Maharaj, but I'm anxious to hear from you. Someday, hopefully, you'll be giving class here. Anyway, Hare Krishna. So today we're reading from 3rd canto. We're on the 24th chapter. It's called The Renunciation of Kardama Muni. We're on text number 16. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam udirayet nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and Srila Prabhupada, translator and commentator. Because if we didn't have the translation and we didn't have the comments, we wouldn't understand a word of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we would all owe it all to Srila Prabhupada. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering service unto the pure devotees, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Okay, text 16. Vedaham adyam purusham Vedaham adyam purusham avitirnas famayaya Avatirnam Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirnam Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Please chant. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirnam Svamayaya. Bhutanam Se Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Muni. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirna Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirnam Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirnam Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Vedaham Adyam Purusham. Avatirna Svamayaya. Bhutanam Sevadim Deham. Bibranam Kapilam Mune. Veda. No. Aham. I. Adyam. The original. Purusham. Enjoyer. Avatirnam. Incarnated. Svamayaya. By his own internal energy. Bhutanam. Of all the living entities. Sevadim. The bestower of all desires. Who is just like a vast treasure. Deham. The body. Bibranam. Assuming. Kapilam. Kapila Muni. Mune. O sage Kardama. So this is a verse spoken by Brahma. I'm going to review some of the verses before so that you can focus in where we are, but this is Lord Brahma speaking to Kardama. O Kardama, I know that the original Supreme Personality of Godhead has now appeared as an incarnation by his internal energy. He is the bestower of all desired by the living entities, and he has now assumed the body of Kapila Muni. Let's say it together. O Kardama, I know that the original Supreme Personality of Godhead has now appeared as an incarnation by his internal energy. He is the bestower of all desired, and he has now assumed the body of Kapila Muni. So before I read the purport, Srila Prabhupada's purport, I'm just going to review a few verses so that you'll know what the context of this text is. Okay, I'm going to start with text number 9, and I'll just read the English. So this is Sutta Goswami explaining, Brahma, the firstborn living being, went along with Marichi and other sages to the place of Kardama's hermitage, which was surrounded by the river Saraswati. Text 10, Maitreya continued, O killer of the enemy, the unborn Lord Brahma, who is almost independent in acquiring knowledge, could understand that a portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his quality of pure existence, had appeared in the womb of Devahuti just to explain the complete state of knowledge known as Sankhya Yoga. 11. After worshiping the Supreme Lord with gladdened senses and a pure heart for his intended activities as an incarnation, Brahma spoke as follows to Kardama and Devahuti. Lord Brahma said, My dear son Kardama, since you have completely accepted my instructions without duplicity, showing them proper respect, you have worshipped me properly. Whatever instructions you took from me, you have carried out, and thereby you have honored me. I'm going to read that one again because that's important to assimilate. Brahma said, My dear son Kardama, since you have completely accepted my instructions without duplicity, showing them proper respect, you have worshipped me properly. Whatever instructions you took from me, you have carried out, and thereby you have honored me. 13. Sons ought to render service to their father exactly to this extent. One should obey the command of his father or spiritual master with due deference, saying, Yes, sir. 14. Lord Brahma then praised Kardama Muni's 9 daughters, saying, All your thin-waisted daughters are certainly very chaste. I'm sure they will increase this creation by their own descendants in various ways. And yesterday's verse was, Therefore, today, please give away your daughters to the foremost of the sages with due regards for the girl's temperament and likings, and thereby spread your fame all over the universe. And then once again, today's translation. O Kardama, I know that the original Supreme Personality of Godhead has now appeared as an incarnation by his internal energy. He is the bestower of all desired by the living entities. And he has now assumed the body of Kapila Muni. Om Agyana Timirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chaksu Umilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master very kindly forced open my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. Therefore, I am totally indebted to him and beg for service at his lotus feet life after life. So here's Srila Prabhupada's purport. Excuse me. I'm just going to read it bit by bit, okay? In this verse, we find the words Purusham Avatirnam Svamayaya. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is everlastingly, eternally the form of Purusha, the predominator or enjoyer. And when he appears, he never accepts anything of this material energy. So this is a point that Srila Prabhupada makes over and over again. Srimad Bhagavatam makes this point over and over again. In fact, the whole purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam, or one of the main purposes of Srimad Bhagavatam, is to establish the supremacy of the personality of Godhead and to describe his various activities and characteristics, etc., etc. The living entities in the material world have a tendency to be very conditioned, and their knowledge of God, or even their inclination to try to even know God, is very small. And under that illusion, the force of illusion of the material energy, even if we try to understand a little bit about God, the tendency is to try to understand him from our perspective. With our teeny little half of a pea-like brain, we're trying to understand something that is so far beyond our powers of conception that it's actually impossible. Thank you. It's actually impossible. So Srimad Bhagavatam is always opening our eyes to the difference between the conditioned living entities, or the minute jiva, or the little living entities, and the difference between them and the Supreme Lord, who is unlimited, eternal, full of bliss, full of knowledge, full of all potencies, etc., etc. So, again, this phrase, Purusham avatirnam svamayaya, that he's the supreme Purusha, the supreme enjoyer. That's a nice concept to try to digest. He's the supreme enjoyer. He's come into this material world in this form of Kapila. It's just Kapila Muni and the Lord's other incarnations are just exhibiting a spark, a tiny fragment sometimes, a tiny fragment, or whatever amount is needed of the Lord's unlimited potency, because he has a plan in this incarnation of Kapila to speak the Sankhya Yoga system, or analyzing the difference between matter and spirit very minutely. He has a purpose, a specific purpose in this incarnation. So he comes among us sometimes, and it appears like he's a human being, but he's totally in a whole different category, and that's what's being explained here in this purport. Okay, I'm going to continue on. The spiritual world is a manifestation of his personal internal potency, whereas the material world is a manifestation of his material or differentiated energy. The word svamayaya, by his own internal potency, indicates that whenever the Supreme Personality of Godhead descends, he comes in his own energy. He comes in pure spiritual energy. He's manifesting his pure spiritual energy. And in fact, when we analyze it, we hear of the material energy, which is temporary. One of the biggest characteristics of it, material energy, is that it's temporary. The energy itself is eternal, but the manifestation of this material world is temporary and goes through a cyclic progression of manifestation and growth and maintenance, etc., etc., and then the dwindling and then the annihilation. So that material energy, the Lord appears inside that material energy, but that energy is he himself also. That material energy belongs to the Lord. In other words, when you extrapolate that, we're thinking that, oftentimes we think that there's two different energies, or three. The Lord has unlimited energies, but sometimes they're categorized in three major categories: internal, external, and marginal potency. That said, sometimes we're thinking that the external energy is separate from the Lord. It's not separate, it's the Lord's energy. This is the Lord's energy. And in fact, it's explained that in the spirit, this is the spiritual world. We're in the spiritual world. We're just in this cloudy section. We're in the cloudy section of the spiritual world. It's just a small little manifestation. In other words, again, getting to that point of extrapolating on that, there's nothing outside of Krishna. It's just our tendency to put things in categories. This is mine, this is his, this is yours, or I'm here and the Supreme Lord is there. No, the Supreme Lord is everywhere. It's just a question of training the eyes, or seeing through the eyes of Shastra Chakshu, see through the eyes of Shastra and see that everything is a manifestation of his supreme energy. So he comes and in manifests here. Why does he come to the material world? To attract the living entities. To attract the living entities to more or less say, hey, wake up. Hey, wake up. This isn't your home. This isn't the best place for you to be. We can try and try and try, and we see this huge endeavor all around us, trying and trying and trying to become happy in the material world. We weren't happy with just a simple house, so we had to build a skyscraper. So then to build the skyscraper, we needed so many other things and so many things. And then when the traffic got too big, we had to change the roads this way. So many counteractions, always counteracting the different difficulties that material world presents. As if, and it's propagated by modern materialistic scientific advancement, that sooner or later we'll get it together and there won't be any more problems. We'll conquer over birth, death, old age, and disease. We'll if it's too hot, we have air conditioners, so that's fine. When it gets too cold, we have heating. When there's flooding, well, we haven't quite figured that one out yet, but we'll adjust in so many ways. And as we can see lately, material nature is certainly giving her a little backlash after so much exploitation by the living entities. And still we're thinking, oh yeah, but if I just get enough insurance, then if there's a hurricane, my house will be okay, I'll get another house, et cetera, et cetera. It's always counteracting the obstacles that the material energy comes. An intelligent person will think, there must be something else going on. There must be something higher. There must be something I'm supposed to learn from this. Is it always such a struggle? That's one sign of awakening of intelligence. Anyway, Srila Prabhupada continues, he says, I'm going back one sentence. The word Svamayaya, by his own internal potency, indicates that whenever the Supreme Personality of Godhead descends, he comes in his own energy. He may assume the body of a human being, but that body is not material. Bhagavad Gita, therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is clearly stated that only fools and rascals, mudhas, consider the body of Krishna to be the body of a common human being. And I'm sure you can give me the Sanskrit for that verse that Prabhupada just paraphrased. I'll say it again, I'll read it again, and then you guys think. It's Bhagavad Gita verse, and I'm sure you all know it. Bhagavad Gita, therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is clearly stated that only fools and rascals, that's your big hint, mudhas, consider the body of Krishna to be the body of a common human being. Sanskrit, verse. Can you say it really loud? And can you give us the English, even if it's paraphrased? It's okay.
Fools and rascals deride me when I descend in the human form.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Fools and rascals deride the Lord when he descends in the human form, because thinking in their small way, they're thinking, he's like me. He's like me. He's the same. He might be a little better. Maybe a little, maybe more strong, a little stronger, a little famous, little this, that. But, compared to me, whatever, we're comparing it to ourselves. But the Supreme Lord is total, and that's why Krishna, bluntly, calls them fools and rascals. Because although they're seeing with their eyes, they're not really seeing properly. Seeing with the eyes, we put a lot of faith, don't we, in seeing with our eyes. Prove it to me. Show me. But Srila Prabhupada often, or so many times, gives some really good examples why the eyes aren't perfect. Can you think of some examples that Prabhupada says about what's the problem with just seeing with your eyes? Go into this side of the room, okay? Yes, dear. We don't have spiritual vision, correct. We don't have perfect senses. You want to elaborate on that a little bit, particularly about the eyes we're talking about. How does that affect the eyes? Imperfect senses, how does that affect the eyes? We can't see, the lights go out, can't see a thing. We don't know what's going on in the hall out there, and it's just right over there. It's just a few feet away. We can't see through the wood there. Our eyes are imperfect. And even, some of us, even looking through our eyes, we can't see unless we get a little bit of help every now and then. Right. So the eyes are limited. But we're thinking, even though we simultaneously see the imperfections or the limitations of our senses, still we're thinking, I can understand it by my own endeavor. I can understand this by my own endeavor. I can't even add up 3 + 1 + 2 + 40 times 40 divided by 20 very fast, but I'm thinking that I can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hello? So this point is being stated in various ways over and over again in the Bhagavatam. In order to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there's a few qualifications or few things that we need to do. So what are a few things that we need to do in order to try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead? There's a variety of things. Did you have? Sincerity, good. Anything else? Desire. Dissatisfaction in the material world, very good. Yeah, if you're not dissatisfied, you're just going to happily go along the little road and fall off the cliff, right? And now think in terms of Bhagavad Gita. What does Bhagavad Gita say? 434. In the Bhagavad Gita, what does he say? Yeah, so what's tadvidi paripatena mean? You have to say it a little louder. Inquire, you have to ask, which was what we were saying. And what else? Service. We have to make that connection by rendering service. So how do we render service? We can render service in various ways. It means physically we can do sweeping the floor, this and that. That's necessary, bona fide, wonderful, purifying. But also service comes by listening, by hearing from the scriptures. That's also that's our service. Our service is to hear from the scriptures and render service to the spiritual master by trying to fulfill his mission. And that's exactly what Lord Brahma was saying in a few verses prior to Kardama. Kardama, you heard my instructions, and the instructions that he got at that particular time was to propagate the universe, because it was in the beginning of creation, and Lord Brahma needed a few more people to come. Sorry. And Brahma said to Kardama, you heard my instructions, you followed them, and you executed them. You took them to heart, and therefore you have honored me. So that's in taking it to how we can apply that in our lives. We can hear from Srila Prabhupada, hear his scripture instructions in the scriptures, hear his instructions on taking up service and chanting the holy name and bringing other people and trying to execute that in so many varieties of ways. So many varieties of ways. And that, Srila Prabhupada says I have to admit, I can't remember exactly where in the purport, but in one of his purports, Srila Prabhupada says, it's very difficult to understand the mystery. He calls it a mystery of how by rendering service, one becomes purified. He said, but he emphasized, but it does happen. By rendering service, one does become purified. And we have all had that experience in our lives also, because even when we started our little path on Krishna consciousness, and we read from the scriptures and we chanted so sincerely, etc., 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 then after a few months of rendering service, when you read that scripture again, the very same purport, verse and purport or story, there's always new nuances, there's new light that's shed in there. And one of the reasons that's because Srimad Bhagavatam is living scriptures. It's not just a book. It's not just a book. So we should approach it very respectfully, very, very reverentially, with a prayerful attitude, praying that the Lord will reveal himself. He'll reveal it. And this is exactly first verse, Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first verse, that this is how Brahma himself, who Prabhupada said, no, not Prabhupada, Sukadeva Goswami said, is practically independent in acquiring knowledge. He's Adi Kavi, the original living being, the original living being. And he was enlightened, how? Through the heart. Somebody needs to open the door. He was enlightened through the heart. And that's where we render service, we do so many things, and Krishna, we make our endeavor, and Krishna will reveal himself gradually by our endeavor. It's not, and again, taking the example of Lord Brahma. When Lord Brahma awoke to consciousness, when he was on that transcendental lotus flower, and he awoke to consciousness, his first impressions and thought was, who am I? Where am I? what am I here for? What am I supposed to do? And then, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with the story, after he performed hundreds of years of tapasya, thousands of years, sometimes there's different numbers given, but according to the calculation of the demigods, thousands of years of austerity, Krishna partially revealed himself. Partially. Not even total, not even 100% fully, because that's kind of impossible for the living entity to comprehend, because even Krishna doesn't, he's always expanding. But anyway, he partially revealed himself to Lord Brahma. But it's a gradual process. So for ourselves also, we can extrapolate a little bit of meaning from that by our rendering of service, our chanting of our rounds, our attempt at service, and et cetera, and our regular personal sadhana program that we go, gradually, the fog or misconceptions in our heart becomes lifted, and we're able to understand things by Krishna's grace, slowly. Okay, I'll continue on so that we finish the purport. The word Sevadim means that he is the original bestower of all the necessities of life upon the living entities. In the Vedas, it is also stated that he is the chief living entity and that he bestows all desired necessities of all the desired necessities of other living entities. Can you think of the verse that Prabhupada's paraphrasing there? Krishna is the chief living entity of all the little jivas. He's the supreme. Thanks. He's the supreme eternal. He's the supreme eternal, and he's a living being, and the living entities are living beings. He's the supreme living being, and he's supplying all the necessities of life to the little living being. He's the supreme, we're the small. He's the big he's the big jiva, we're the little teeny jiva. He's supplying the necessities of life to all living entities. And we can say that it rolls off the tongue quite easily. Oh yeah, Krishna is supplying it. He's supplying, but think what that means. It's everything that we're experiencing is given to us by Krishna's mercy. The air that we breathe, the prasadam that we eat, or the food that we eat, or whatever, every single thing, water, air, all those necessities. And then he's fulfilling the desires of all the living entities too, according to what they deserve and according to their merit, according to their desire. So for the conditioned living entities who are not so inclined to understand about the Lord, he's still providing all the necessities through the arrangement of his external energy, the material energy. He's supplying those, and according to their merit or what they deserve, according to their accumulation of karmic activities, they're getting the results. For the devotee, it's a different category it's a different energy. Nectar of Devotion explains that even one who just attempts to become a devotee, just beginning the stages of devotional service, they're just saying the Lord's holy name even once, immediately comes under the control of the internal potency of the Lord, which is Srimati Radharani's potency. And through that shelter, then what happens to a devotee or an aspiring devotee is a special arrangement by the Lord, not just tit for tat type of karma type of thing. Because he is the bestower of the necessities of all others, he is called God. The Supreme is also a living entity. He is not impersonal. Have we heard this a few times from Srila Prabhupada? That the Lord is the supreme living entity. He's not impersonal. There's different stages of understanding the Lord. There's understanding the Lord as there's understanding of God, and it's a bona fide level of advancement to understand the spiritual nature of things, the eternal aspect or the living force, that there's a force behind. That's a bona fide process. Then the next step up is to understand that the Supreme Lord is within the heart of all living entities. That's also, but it's bona fide and when followed properly, it's true information, but it's limited. That it's partial, not limited. It's partial. And then the full understanding, Bhagavan realization, is that the Lord is the supreme personality of Godhead. He's the bestower of everything to the living entities. He's the creator of the universes. But he has even, it's not that that's his job description. You know, he has his own personal nature, his own abode, separate. Just as, where was I reading just now? He enters into the cosmos. Oh yeah, in the Chaturshloki verses, that I know for certain that I enter into into the cosmos, but I'm separate also. I enter, but I'm not there. I'm separate. My personal existence and my personal activities is separate. Srila Prabhupada says, as we are individual, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also individual, but he is the supreme individual. Nitya Nityanam, the supreme individual. That is the difference between God and the ordinary living entities. And this is a point that's stressed over and over again in Srimad Bhagavatam. The difference between the Lord and the living entities, and how the living entities, in order to situate themselves properly in a proper understanding as to who they are, need to hear over and over again about the glories and pastimes of the Supreme Lord, so that we become absorbed in that, and actually rectify our false identification as separate from the Lord. There's nothing separate from the Lord. So, comments, questions, discussions, additions, corrections also. Maharaj, would you like to make some comments and enlighten us kindly? I believe he's trying to get a mic, but he can't find it. But anyway, please.
When we say that human, when it comes woman also, human being means, that's it. Curious to know.
Curious to know what that means?
Human being means, because the form is different, man and woman.
Oh, does he come as a woman? Is that what you're asking? Once in a while he does. And he comes in its form of Mohini Murti. And that's the female form of the Lord. And also, Srimati Radharani. Would you like to enlighten us further?
Of course. Prabhupada said that Krishna always Purusha.
Purusha.
Not female. God is always Purusha.
He's always Purusha, the supreme enjoyer. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu.
There was a distinction between his own personal abode. You said, that he doesn't enter into the cosmos. But the job description that Srila Prabhupada has given is quite interesting, is that he supplies the necessities of all others. So, it got me thinking is that if one of his, what about for people who, of course, God doesn't have an obligation to fulfill all the humanity's sense gratification, but if someone doesn't even have the bare necessities like food, water, and things like that, would it be more difficult to accept God?
Yeah, but it would be more difficult for that person to accept the Lord. But Krishna, the thing is that we think we're seeing the situation and understanding the situation. So if there's persons or personalities or countries or segments of population that are not that are suffering greatly because of not having sufficient necessities of food and shelter and this and that. And we think, oh, that's terrible. Let me give some charity and give some whatever. But the thing is that what's the circumstance? The circumstance is that the living entity always has a choice to turn towards the Lord or turn against the Lord. Turn their back on the Lord. If someone decides to turn their back on the Lord and act in a way completely ignorant of the Lord's positions and desires, then Krishna, it's like Srila Prabhupada says, somebody who wants to know God, he will come in contact with information about God. Somebody who wants to forget the Lord, Krishna will give him the intelligence to forget him. So even his arguments, even the atheistic arguments, are coming by the mercy of the Lord. Because why? Because he's fulfilling that desire. Oftentimes we don't make a correlation between the situation that we're in and our desires. The situation that we're in and our desires. Because we hear that there's 8,400,000 different species of life, and the living entity takes birth according to his desire. So someone might think, I don't really desire to be a tiger. It's not that, when you try to understand that, it's not that they're thinking that they're desiring to be a tiger, but if they're acting in a way that they want to eat, bloody parts of people's bodies, then that's the job description or the characteristics of a tiger or very thing. So they might not be thinking, oh yeah, I really want to be degraded and be a tiger. No, I just want to do whatever I want. I want to eat anything I want. Well, that means hog. Well, that means this. I want to defy the Lord, and that means suffering. Just like now, everyone's all concerned about climate change, and rightfully so. It's, very drastic what's happening lately. But they're not understanding what's behind that. All of the activities that we accumulated doing collectively and individually, completely defying the orders and the natural order of things, and here's the result. And we're thinking, general, materialistic society is thinking, oh, well, we can make some arrangement. Still defying the Lord. And that was one other thing. Oh, and here's another very nice jewel that Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us. Srimad Bhagavatam is bringing us to the point of realizing I'm responsible for my position. In materialistic society, we think my position, I had a hard childhood. It's my mother's fault that I'm like this, because she was overbearing. Or I was, whatever. This happened when I went to church. I was mistreated in such a way that I was totally turned off against religion. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's this situation. My boss didn't like me, whatever. We're thinking, the tendency is to think, and we still have that tendency to think, if everyone else in the ashram would just cooperate with me, I would be having a better time. Or if, et cetera, et cetera. So many different varieties of that. But Bhagavatam is saying, I'm responsible. Because of what I've done over accumulated this life and accumulated lifetimes, that's why I'm here. I'm getting, by the Lord's mercy, what I deserve. So we don't just go and say, hard-heartedly say, oh, they're suffering, they're starving, they're this and that, they're getting what they deserve, blah, blah, blah. No, but we try to go to the root cause of the suffering. The root cause of the suffering is ignorance of the Lord and His program, the process of turning to the Lord. So by alleviating that ignorance, then activities can change, then consciousness can change, then the Lord's pleased. It's just a simple, it's just very simple. It's just a simple turnaround of consciousness, but it has to be, that's why Om Agyana Timirandas, we were born in ignorance, but there is a torchlight of knowledge, and we just have to turn to that, and try to assimilate it and act in that way, and then things turn around. Just like there was, 100 years ago, probably before all of you were born. Tamal Krishna Maharaj once said on 55th Street in New York, so we're close to the area, but anyway, Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, you could have gone through the whole morning program. You could have been totally ecstatic kirtan, you did your best during japa, or other people did really good during japa, whatever, and still you had some nice prasadam, and now it's time, and you're hesitant to do your service. Why is that? Everything's fine externally. You had enough rest, you had enough prasadam, you did this and that, everything's fine. But the mind brings us to different levels of dissatisfaction or fault finding or whatever, thinking, oh, if it was only like this, then I'd be that, if I didn't have to do that or whatever. But Bhagavatam, again, brings it to, this is my choice. These are my choices. I'm responsible for my choices, and if I make responsible choices, then the path back to Godhead is, it's guaranteed, it's there, and it's a gradual process. That was a long-winded answer, wasn't it? Anyway, I probably forgot even your main point. Was that okay, though? Semi okay? And yes, Prabhu?
Thank you very much for the class. So you were talking about service and how we see our service externally, okay, sweeping the floor, chanting our rounds. But then you also mentioned that there's a service in listening and assimilating the knowledge of the scripture. So in that conversation, patients said that we're supposed to be engaged all the time in service. But obviously we're not always physically engaged in service. So how do we get engaged all the time in service?
Okay. Question summarized is, how do we get engaged all the time in service? Because we might have some physical service and then also hearing. Well, a couple of things. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, we're instructed to remember Krishna 24 hours a day. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he clarifies that. He said, for a neophyte devotee, for aspiring devotees, that's impossible. That's a very elevated, that's our goal, to remember Krishna 24 hours a day. But he says, for a neophyte devotee, remembering Krishna once a day, that's good, okay? So let's try to do a little bit more than that. But now let's also think, how do we always engage 24 hours? Don't forget there's, excuse me, nine limbs of devotional service. There's 9 ways to execute devotional service. There's not just one way. There's, engaging the body in service, that's helpful. But hearing and chanting, that's possible as more than a few minutes a day. That's possible, So even your service, or those people who have service, to go on the Harinam, right? Every day on the Harinam. That means that there's a certain amount of time that they're taking to go from the temple to the spot. It might be an hour, it might be half an hour, it might be something. So there's time there to be, it's not wasted time, it's time that could be, hearing and chanting about Krishna and so many things, whatever, somehow or other. So when one tries to increase one's hearing and chanting, you'll find that there's a lot of room for that. And it doesn't necessarily mean sitting down reading the books all the time either. It can be, because we have so many gadgets and facilities these days, you can hear in so many different ways. So we have put, Srila Prabhupada's given us a very high, and the process of bhakti yoga, free from envy, pure, know this, know that. That's a very high standard. And we're not necessarily even close to that standard yet. So we make our attempts by seeking to improve our service attitude. I'm talking to myself here. Seeking to improve our service attitude, and also taking advantage and just trying to see how we can do that. So, for example, we might have had some time the day before or previous days to have read something. So that's great, we read something. Why not tell somebody what you read? That makes it more solid in your mind what you read. And it also points out, when you try to tell a story, it also points out to yourself the little parts that you're weak in. You can't remember exactly what happened. Like if you ever try to tell anybody the Shaman Taka Jewel story, like from the beginning, there's a lot of details in that story, you know? And we know that story, right? Try to tell somebody what happened in the procedure and when did this happen and when did the lion take, anyway, you know what I mean? So by hearing it, that's one thing, that's great. Tell somebody and then you realize, oh, I skipped that part or I skipped that part or whatever. Or even then we say, just like Prabhu was saying about, you were saying something and I just forgot what I was going to say, sorry. Oh, how Krishna enters, thank you, Krishna, how he enters the material world, but he stays separate. So that concept, Achinta Bheda Abheda Tattva, that's a very amazing, chunk of philosophy to digest. Achinta Bheda. Simultaneously, it's one, but it's also different. Srila Jiva Goswami explains that very concept that the Lord is beyond our ability to understand, that's like the first qualification to try to understand the Lord, that we can't understand him. He's achintya, he's beyond our conception. But that means we're starting out. I kind of think I'm wandering from the point there. Would you like to add anything for your realization, how you can always engage in service, or more, engage in service more?
I'm wondering how we can make it, like even in those moments when we're not necessarily engaging directly, how the meditation can still be there. Well in the service.
That,
But it's still considering different angles.
and that's good. That consideration, how to engage in devotional service and how to, that consideration, that's also service. Because without that consideration, without that, how to keep the mind focused, and if you probably noticed, it's very difficult to keep the mind focused. And the more one tries to, the more one tries to focus the mind, the more difficult it is. But this is the beauty of bhakti. The beauty of bhakti is that we engage Hrishikesha, we engage our senses in the service of the Supreme Lord, and then it flows. Just like we could see so many opportunities to do service if our eyes are open and our ears are open to the situation. Just like maybe in some circumstances when the weather's cooler, Prabhupada needs a chadar. Put his chadar on him. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, little things like that. It could be great, tremendous service, but it could be simple little things. Oh, my Lord, here's a beautiful flower. Let me offer it to the Lord. Let me offer it to you. Please accept this. It's made by Krishna. The flower is made by Krishna. The ability to pick up the flower is Krishna's potency, and everything. The colors, everything, and we're still offering it to him because then it's in its right position. So the point of bhakti, Prabhupada stresses that Krishna is a person. So there's always, just so we come here and we can see the beautiful form of Radha Govinda and look at and we can think of, some of us think of, how we can make the flower vases nice. Some people think, how I can make an outfit this way and that way. Somebody who dresses the deities thinks, well, if I put the crown like this, whatever. It's very absorbing. So perhaps that might not be your inclination just yet or whatever, but there's other things. If you're absorbed if you're participating in the Harinam program, how can you make it better? Maybe in a big way, but maybe in a small way. Little things like that. Any other points? Or yes, Devaki Prabhu. Yeah. 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 Yeah, thank you. So, for an internet audience, David K. Prabhu was saying about the mind's very difficult to focus, but it's always making its plans for something or other, usually nonsense. But if we start to plan, utilize that planning propensity that we have in the service of the Lord, making plans for the Lord, even if half of the plans don't manifest, then there's still benefit, there's still purification, there's still a great benefit from that. And that the scriptural reference is somewhere that in previous ages, people who thought ill of somebody, who thought of doing sinful activity, they got karma for that. They got a reaction for a sinful thought. And there's stories in the Bhagavatam, especially in the later cantos, of a king. This is a paraphrase. This is not a quote of a story, but of a king who was suffering in a certain way, went to the Brahmins, why am I suffering? They looked at his chart. They said, we don't see any sinful activities in this life, but in your previous life, you had a sinful thought. This was in a different age. Kali Yuga, we're fortunately not, that's not the laws of Kali Yuga, In Kali Yuga, one has to do the sinful act or to get the karma. But the benefit in Kali Yuga is if we think of a good thing, we get the benefit of that. So therefore, think of distributing hundreds and thousands of books or whatever, or having Harinams simultaneously in every single park in New York or whatever. Think of those things. And then it just so, as Mataji was saying, it just helps the mind, engages the mind, but it also helps the mind on the path of purity instead of just like on the path of nonsense that it tends to go on. Its general default characteristic is fault finding and etc. Other comments or questions? So we'll continue on with this story of Kapila's appearance, and thank you all for your kind attendance. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.